I stood out by the gravel road, a kid just 10 years old, waiting for the old man I knew would come along. He would stop under the oak tree where I played in the sand, sat down and talk about Jesus, old Jake, the Jesus man. Everybody made fun of him, no one wanted him around. He lived in a shack, and his clothes were hand-me-downs. His wife left him years ago. She didn't understand how Jesus changed a drunkard to Jake, the Jesus man. Oh, Jake had the kind of eyes I'd never seen before. Why, they lit up like the stars when he talked about the Lord. His voice got soft and tender when he told salvation's plan, how Jesus died for sinners, oh Jake, the Jesus man. Well, I grew up, became a man, hearing old Jake say that Jesus died on Calvary to wash our sins away. I gave my heart to Jesus one day there in the sand, got on the road to heaven with Jake, the Jesus man. To me, old Jake was special. I'll never forget the day that Mama called to tell me old Jake had passed away. They found him by the gravel road, his old Bible in his hand, and a smile upon his weathered face, old Jake, the Jesus man.
Okay, I think we got it. I think I got it going. I hope everyone can hear me. It's been a pretty rough week. A lot of prayers needed. Guys, I know I'm certainly not perfect. Make a lot of mistakes, and Lord knows. So if you have your Bibles, we're in the book of Acts, chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. We're going to continue our Bible study this evening. Through Acts chapter number 7. Oh, hold on, I got a call coming in. Give me just a second here. Hold on, guys. I'll be right back with you. Give me 1 second. Oh, can't get my screen back up here. But it's Acts chapter 7. I'll be right with you guys in just 1 minute. Nope, I missed the call, so I guess we'll go ahead. Acts chapter 7. Real quick. Well, there it is again. Let me see if I can get this. Must be important. Okay, guys. Sorry about that. Again, no, not sure. So Acts chapter 7 and verse number 1. We're picking up where Stephen was having a conversation with what's really believed to be the Sanhedrin, the 71 elders made up of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and of the Sadducees is the high priest. And he gets into beginning one, a great speech, a great man of God. Um, a great man of God. So, anyway, so we got down through the first couple. In verse number 3, we talked about Abraham, um, where he was told to get out of the country of his kindred, and come into a land which I will show thee. And this is God directing Abram, and you guys should be able to see this now on your map. So they started down, just a real quick recap, down in Ur of the Chaldees, and they moved up through Euphrates River Valley into Haran, up to number 2, and that's where Terah died, and Haran was actually one of Terah, Abraham's brother. That was his name. He never actually got to leave Ur. He died there. Um, and the family moved up the Euphrates River Valley to a settlement called Haran. And that's where this sort of picks up from that perspective. Okay. He moves out of, so God's telling him to get out of there, get out of this Haran, number 2 on your screen, and get into a country that he'll show thee. And so in number 4, he's talking about the land of the Chaldees that dwelt in Charan. Well, Charan is Haran, and that's what he's talking about here, is this area number 2. So picking up there, again, just a little bit more of a rehash. Got a little bit I want to talk about this evening, won't be on for very long. Speaking of Katsumi this week. Okay, Brandy. And verse number 5 is where I want to pick up, and we'll go from there. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, when, oh wow, as yet he had no child. Okay. So what's he talking about here? So there's believed to be a contradiction here, and a lot of people try to use this and point out as a contradiction. And it looks like it's a contradiction with Genesis 15:7 through 8, but we're going to see that it's not. So remember here that it said that he's got no inheritance here, right? And in Genesis 15:7 through 8, we actually see, and he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees. Sorry, guys, I apologize for that. Out of Ur of the Chaldees. I can turn my sound off there. Ah. Well, I can't even get my sound to turn off. Apparently, I don't know how to turn the sound off. There we go. Sorry about that. Brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees, and on your map again, he's talking about down here in number 1. Let me bring the Bible back up so you can see the actual scripture. Into a land that I shall show thee. And he goes on and says, and he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took and divided these things, divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against the other, but the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram, not Abraham yet, I believe it's chapter 17, he changes to Abraham, drove them away, and the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of surety that thou seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. So here the Bible's talking about what not appears to be, but is a promise of an inherited land. But then we get up into Acts, we actually see that God's saying, wait a minute, you're not going to, you have no inheritance to this land. Well, we know he had to buy a sepulcher, a tomb, right, to bury Sarai in. But what's going on here? So why is the Bible appearing to contradict itself? It's really not, because this promise is really fulfilled through the descendants of Abraham, right? So when it gets in there and he starts talking about in verse number 4, then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Charan, and from thence, when his father was dead, he's talking about Terah, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. Verse number 5, and gave him none inheritance in it. No, not so much as to set his foot on, yet he promised that he would give it for him, or give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him. Right, and we all know that all three major religions on the earth today stem out of Abraham. Right, so what do we see? Well, we see what we see is the Jews and Father Abraham. Right, we see the Christians that for us come out of Isaac, and out of Ishmael comes the Muslim faith, right? So, so from Abraham is sources three of the world's major religions. Most of you guys know that or have heard that by now. So it's no, nothing that's super intuitive from that perspective. But there does appear to be a conflict between Acts chapter 7, verse 5, and Genesis 15, 7 through 8. But it's really not from that perspective, because the promise that God gave him back in Genesis was really fulfilled through his seed. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the seed of Abraham here in a minute, especially the promised seed, which is Isaac. So I do want to talk about the fulfillment through the descendants of Abraham, right? So we see here, God said, you're not entitled to this, in Acts 7, there's nothing promised to you, but back in Genesis, he said, well, you're going to. So how do we clear this up? Well, we're going to start in Genesis 12 and verse 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram, again, not chapter 17 yet, so he's still Abram, and said, unto thy seed will I give thee this land, right? It is fulfilled unto his seed. So when you go back and you look here in Acts chapter 7, verse 5, and he gave him none inheritance in it, talking about the land. So Abraham didn't have the inheritance. It was passed on to his seed. Again, back in, man, I hope you guys are with me on that one. Let's see. Oh, no, you know what? Daggone it. I might actually, let me try this again where you guys can actually see it. Sorry about that, guys. So, here we go. Let's try this again. Acts chapter 7, verse 5, talking about no inheritance that's given to Abraham, right? We go back to Genesis 12, 7, and the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land, right? So if you look at where he is, I can actually bring up a map, I think. Yep. So in this section between Bethel and Ai, where the little number 1 is, there's a 1, 2, and 5. In that area between Bethel and Ai is where Abraham is here in Genesis chapter 12. And that's where we have the first account that I'm aware of that Abraham builds an altar in Cana, right? So again, why is there a contradiction? No, there's not. There's never a contradiction in the Bible. What we have to do is study it out. I love the way Pastor puts it, precept upon precept. So let's add another precept to it. Genesis 13, 14 through 15. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to what? Thy seed forever. Right? At this point, they're actually down in this area, the bottom part, because off to the east would be what is believed to be Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? All right. So, one more precept, Genesis 17. And God said unto Abraham, thou shalt keep my covenant forever, thou and thy seed after thee in thy generations. Right? And this gets into the covenant of circumcision, and we're going to talk just a little bit about that in just a minute, actually. So do we see a contradiction in Acts chapter 7, verse number 5? We do not. And he gave none inheritance in it. So Abraham himself didn't really have an inheritance there, but that inheritance was passed really and fulfilled through his children. Okay? So there's that. Verse number 6. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land. All right, now when we're looking at this, I think everybody probably is aware of what's being referenced here. I'll read it. There's several references to it. Talk about it briefly, and then we'll look at a few other things this evening. Okay. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage and entreat them evil 400 years. Anybody want to take a guess where that is? Yeah, he's talking about Egypt. Well, I absolutely highlighted the wrong area. So he's talking about the captivity going into Egypt, right? Now, where do we see the captivity really spoken of? Well, we're going to find that in Genesis 15. Make sure you guys still have it on your screen there. Genesis 15, 13 through 15, I think it is, or 14. I'm sorry, guys. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Now, there's a key to this, and if you see something here, especially when we're bouncing back and forth, talks about here, the children of Israel that are going into captivity shall serve them, right? Shall serve them. Now, when we come back to Acts, let me see where it is. You go down to verse 7. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge. So God says, you know what? They're going to be in servitude and bondage to Egypt for 400 years. I'm going to judge them. But while they're in bondage, they're going to serve the Egyptians. But in verse 7, he said, that nation to whom shall be in bondage will I judge, said God. And after that, they shall come forth and serve what? Me in this place. So, children of Israel that are in bondage in Egypt, and we know that judgment's passed. We certainly see that through the plagues that are there. But what ultimately happens? God prevails, right? And God always prevails. So 400 years they were there. So if anybody asks, how long were the children of Israel, or the nation of Israel, in captivity in Egypt? Well, that's 400 years. It's right there in the Bible. Okay? Right there in the Bible. So that really sort of speaks to that one. There's a little reference here in Acts 13, verse 20. You had to look that one up. And after that, he gave unto them judges about the space of 400 years and 450 years unto Samuel prophet. There's some people try to put a linkage there. I'd have to study it out a little bit more. I'm not so sure that's the case. But what we're talking about again is the children of Israel as they begin to multiply. They ultimately go into captivity for 400 years. So it is verse number 8. I want to spend just a few minutes with this evening, if you guys will allow me. So verse number 8. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. Okay? So when we're talking about this, covenants are agreements that God makes. And if God makes an agreement with you, God will keep that. Will it always be in the time and manner to which we expect it to be? No. God will reveal that too in the covenant himself. Here is a covenant of circumcision. And again, we'll see that in Genesis 17. And God said unto Abraham, we're in verse 17, or chapter 17 of Genesis. Abram's name's now been changed to Abraham. Sarai will become Sarah. And God said unto Abraham, thou shalt keep my covenant therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. He said, listen, this is not just an agreement between us, but this is something that your children are going to keep. So being that, and this is one of the areas that I probably, one of the many areas and that I have probably failed in more than most, well in my share, and I'm sure there's those that can certainly attest to that, but that's in training up my children, something I should have done a much better job of, didn't, but here we see that God expects that, right? A really good example, because the agreement that God made here in the Old Testament with circumcision. Now, what bearing does circumcision have on us today? Absolutely none. I mean, none. It's not a covenant that we live under. We're actually studying through dispensations in our Sunday school class and seeing how God dealt with And dispensation is how God deals with his people in different periods of time, right? He makes different agreements with them, um, different expectations. This is one of circumcision, and we find this in Abraham's time. This would be under the family, the dispensation of the family, or the dispensation of the patriarchs. It's called different things. But anyway, so he said, "This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised." Now, a little bit of the backstory I've heard. I've not been able to truly validate this, but I heard this was one of the ways that Hebrews would be able to identify Hebrews, would be whether or not circumcision had been performed, right? So I'm just going to leave that one there. Um, This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and these seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. Now, there not only does God say what you have to do, but he gets into a lot of detail here. Okay, he goes in, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. Right, and and he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house, or bought with money, or any stranger which is not of thy seed. Now, if you sort of go back into, well, it's really our Sunday school class, we talk about Abraham when he's um, told to leave Haran and go into the promised land, and it talks about leaving his father's house, right? Not just his family, leave his family and his father's house. So remember, the house itself includes everybody, that even those that aren't family, right? Servants and slaves and all of those type of things. So you've got the house, which is the entire, everybody sort of under the dome of what at that point would have been Terah, and then the family, which is those that are actually related. Now, okay, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and ye. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. We talked about this. Now, so that is the covenant of the circumcision that God's talking about. But I want to ask and want to bring up something just a little bit off topic, I guess. But it really starts down here in verse number 8. We'll kind of go back. There's some other things I want to fill in here. But in verse number 8, it said, "And he gave him a covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac." Now, if you're just reading this and you haven't read the Old Testament, that means absolutely nothing to you. This Abraham begot Isaac thing. "And circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs." Right? This gets into the 12 tribe, the 12 patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So you're talking about some serious Bible history, and where the entire New Testament sort of begins to develop from and point back to is right here in Abraham. Yeah, the importance of Abraham, and Pastor Parsons really is doing a good focused study on Abraham and the importance of it. And if you look at the lineage of Abraham, especially when you get into the 12 patriarchs, you realize that that's the foundation of a lot of the Bible that's being pointed to, referenced, and talked to. So there's a ton we can learn there. But I want to talk just a little bit about Isaac. Now, Isaac was not the firstborn to Abraham, though he was the firstborn to Sarah. Okay. So what that says is that Abraham also had a child with his wife's handmaid Hagar, in the name of Ishmael. Now Ishmael is the root of the Nation of Islam, points back to Ishmael. Christianity points back to Isaac. Isaac is God's chosen, not Ishmael. Okay, that's kind of problematic with some people, but in this case, not. But I want to talk a little bit about about Isaac, and there's an event that takes place on Mount Moriah, which is about 3 days' journey from where Abraham is, believed to be the exact same spot that Christ was crucified. I have no doubt of that. I personally believe that from the studies I've done, the traveling, the lay of the land, and sort of the direction and everything. It absolutely lines up. There's no reason that, from what I've studied, to believe that where Abraham was told to take Isaac was the exact same place that Christ was crucified. Okay, so a foretelling of the future. Absolutely, absolutely. But it's about Isaac, and when we read about it and we see it, many times he is portrayed as a young lad going up there on the mountain, which is really not the case. Most scholars will tell you he's anywhere from 18 to 25 years old. He's not a child at all. Most Bible scholars will tell you that. Now, a lot of traditional Bible teachers will stick with the traditional. He was probably a teenager, late teens at the oldest. Most scholars will tell you that's probably not the case at all, based on the way it was written and the time frame. That he was probably anywhere from 18 to 25, more likely the higher end of that. So, something just a little. You guys again may have known that already, but the whole account, and there's some really great sermons that come out of that, and obviously none from me, but on the account of Abraham and Isaac, it was, how could Abraham have done this? How could he follow through with it? Well, Abraham knew already. Do you realize that Abraham already knew that? And I'm not saying it's going to make it any easier. I'm not trying to take anything from God, right? Nor Abraham, from that matter. But Abraham already knew that Isaac would not be sacrificed on the mound, would not die there. Let's put it that way for sure. There's one verse we can jump and look several. Actually, let's do that. Let's Genesis 15, just a couple verses real quick. Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram. Again, it's not chapter 17, so he's still Abram. And a vision saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield. Man, I tell you what, that's amazing right there. And thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is the Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. So what he's saying is, listen, I don't have that which is born. That's my seed. Where's my heir at? Is it going to be Ishmael? Because Ishmael was born, I think he's about 13, 14, probably 14 years older than Isaac, if I remember correctly. He said, is this really going to be, my heir? And God goes on and says, No. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he shall come forth from thine own bowels, and shall be thine heir. Okay, now wait a minute. So God's giving him here, telling, listen, you've got another son coming, right? You've got another son coming. But it's in Genesis 17:19 that there's I won't say an obscure verse, but a verse that's there that many people may not be aware of, that really fills in this whole account of Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah. Okay? Where was that? Verse 19. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him. Okay? He said, listen, I'm going to establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant. But he goes on and makes it clear right here. And with his seed after him. It's this little part of this verse that makes all the difference. If you read through this when you're studying your Bible, and you make sure you take a look at all of it, if you miss this or overread it, it changes. It doesn't change the meaning of it, but the impact of it, of Mount Moriah. If you can recall this and go back and say, wait a minute, and start linking these back and forth and say, wait a minute, Abraham already knew. Now, did he remember? I don't know. We could always argue that. I'm not taking anything from the glory of God, certainly not, nor the faith that Abraham possessed, not at all. That's not it. What I'm saying is that God already established a covenant, an everlasting covenant with Isaac and what? And his seed. So even if God were to allow the sacrifice of of Isaac on Mount Moriah, he would have resurrected him. But I'm of the opinion that he would not have done that. He would have not have allowed the resurrection of Isaac on Mount Moriah for the very fact that that's where his son was to be crucified. And if his son was going to be crucified there, no one else is going to be brought back to life. Not in that place anyway. We know that Christ certainly was in the tomb in Gethsemane. But I don't believe that there would be any event that would even come close to overshadowing the events that took place on Calvary, the cross with Christ. I don't think anybody, God would allow anything to sort of appear to preempt that, right, or steal from the importance of it. That's my 2 cents, and it may not even be worth that. Um, so, but guys, let me get back to where we were. So that's Acts chapter 7 verses, gets us down to verse 8. We didn't get real far this evening, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there this evening. I've got a lot of stuff going on, and I do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully, you got something out of this, and Lord willing, again, stress, Lord willing, we'll be here next Tuesday. God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us, each and every one of you.